Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to our Root Cause Reveal podcast, The Truth Behind the Symptoms. Today, I'd like to introduce you to my guest, Dr. Tao Braun. Dr. Braun is a renowned former clinical psychologist and a U.S. national expert in counterterrorism, violence prevention, and biowarfare mitigation. He pioneered early warnings about the toxic spike protein termed SVX nerve agent and dedicated his research to recovery from long COVID and vaccine injury. Welcome, Dr. Braun.
Thank you so much. It's just such a privilege and an honor, and as I always say, I can have a lot of information to share, but it is absolutely people like you that help to get the word out. So thank you so much for doing this for everybody.
You're so welcome. Could you please tell us a little bit about your journey? What brought you to research post-COVID symptomology?
Let's start off with talking about where I was in 2019 with my work. By 2019, I was considered a subject matter expert in the prevention and response to mass killings. That includes what people would call active shooter or active attacker in terms of school situations, counterterrorism work. But what I specialized in was all around the intentional act of human beings, whether it is an individual or a group, that set out in a planned, methodical, strategic way to go out and essentially kill as many people as possible, is the most blunt way I can say it. Pretty dark work, right? Shining light on it. I think what I was attempting to do in 2019, and the pinnacle of that for me was actually being invited to the Texas Senate. They had had a group set up within the Texas Senate that was looking at mass killings and how to prevent these tragedies. And I was invited by the Texas Senate to come and give testimony. I think that testimony lasted at least 2 hours. Didn't hold back on any of the information that I had. Not party affiliated. And so it was really a deep dive, a scientific dive in terms of where we are, some of the missing pieces. And already in 2019, what I was establishing was that my research had taken me into the neurological aspects of what make up mass killers. So besides what people would know in terms of the psychology of it, of being a psychopath, I was really also looking at what drives psychopathy in terms of neurology. What is it about the biology of mass killers that makes them different? What are some of the medical things that we're missing? And so my work was always from a biopsychosocial perspective. From a threat assessment and threat management perspective, I was 2019, a lead instructor around the nation. My audiences were a mixture between law enforcement, public health, emergency management folk, but all very top tier leadership positions. They would take my work and they would introduce various training modules. They would redirect teams to do things differently. I was part of a core group of people that over the last beyond a decade have been pushing for a threat assessment, threat management model. And so as part of that wheelhouse, when you're talking about intentional killing, there are notable time periods where people have gone out and they've tried to kill people, or they have killed people with either chemical weapons or biological weapons. And that is not always just a military action. I mean, individuals have done it. There was sarin attacks in the subways in Japan. There was attacks with salmonella in terms of a cult. And so this was in my wheelhouse in terms of understanding, how people do this. What do they build? The traditional things always come up in terms of like anthrax, right? And those kind of bacteria. But what I was already looking at that time is where we were in terms of synthetic biology. But boy, did I not realize that was going to become, the topic of our lifetime, right? Yep. And so that's a brief background to where I was. In 2019 in December, I started hearing, from from people from China that there was something occurring over there. And then by January, everybody knew, and we were waiting to hear what this was going to be. And so it all unfolded very, very quickly. From a professional standpoint, people were turning to me and saying, "Doc, is this biowarfare?" And of course, I had to give a professional answer. I'm not going to be able to just say, "Oh, I think it is." I've got to be able to say why. I've got to say what I've been able to find so far. But I'm a solutions-based person, so immediately within those first few months, if we are under biowarfare attack, got to come up with solutions, right? I mean, I'm not gonna just wait around. If this is what's occurring, I want to get the lead on it. And so that's what put me into this fight in early 2020 in terms of just understanding what is this, what are we dealing with? Was it lab made? Was it a leak? Was it intentional? How severe was this going to be? And so that's what put me into research mode in 2020.
I understand that. And so, Dr. Braun, so you're seeing things that people were calling a respiratory infection, but actually were experiencing neurological issues and clotting, loss of smell, fatigue. From a biological perspective, what didn't that just perk your ears like something's not fitting the narrative?
Yeah, I mean, right from the beginning, there were a couple of things going on that I found very confusing, right? And so my whole job prior to the pandemic and even now, I was teaching people to look out for the things that are out of the ordinary. And so I'll give you a couple of things that just come to mind. And of course, there's more of them, but these are what's come to mind for me in 2020. If we were under some sort of biological attack, I found it tremendously out of the ordinary that my colleagues weren't on some form of high alert to be testing environments, talking about whether this could be anthrax. If you look at the symptoms of anthrax, for example, and not just not anthrax that lands up on your skin, but inhaling spores of anthrax, it'll match the beginning signs of COVID, right? And so I was curious, like, why isn't everybody on high alert in terms of looking out for biological agents, right? What is happening with that? The other curiosity for me was that there was a split group in law enforcement and in public health and in emergency management, where, and from the law enforcement side, what I was noticing was that there was a complete underreaction.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that my colleagues weren't concerned about this at all. You know, this idea that right from the beginning, this message of this is just a cold, right? That was being put out there. When I look back on it now, and there's still a lot that I don't have clear answers on, it's very interesting to me that I think that from a lot of the colleagues that I was in direct contact with, they were told and they understood that this was actually nothing at the beginning. And I know that confuses a lot of people because people were sick, right? People got sick in 2020, which is something that we can talk through in terms of what was going on. But I think a lot of people that were in leadership positions that I would call sort of shoulder to shoulder to me, I think that they had the classified information, and I think that they knew that there was no novel virus. And I think that I'll make sure I say this now in case I forget it later. I also think that that was a trick, because what that did is that if there was no novel virus in 2020, and if they were told not to be concerned about it, then they were also not concerned when the vaccine came around, because they would have thought that that was a nothing burger too, right?
Yep.
So if they had higher up information that this was just one big psyop, then they wouldn't have necessarily thought through that same trickery would then apply to them and that they could get damaged by the vaccines, because they would have thought that was nothing. What was another out of the ordinary for me is that they released this sequence very, very early on. They made it public. Could get your hands on it. You could run it through software like Blast, which looks for for matches in terms of known toxins. I even have a document somewhere where it listed how many pieces of this sequence right at the beginning. It was a CDC document. It was absolutely toxic. And so I couldn't understand if this was a nothing burger. And if they are then started talking in 2020 that the same spike protein was going to be used in a vaccine, and there were lists of how toxic this was, it made no sense to me that there was only a small group of people out there that were actually concerned about the spike protein. One of those groups was a group that I was working with at the time, was a COVID-19 group that Dr. McCullough was running.
Mhm.
And there were a group of us that were extremely concerned about the spike protein being used in a vaccine. We had also recognized, and I was one of the first to put it in words, as a non-virologist, non-epidemiologist, non-medical doctor, where I said, this is not a respiratory disease.
No.
This is not acting as a respiratory disease. It doesn't have the same contagion effect. This is causing these peculiar symptoms. So what are we actually dealing with?
Yeah.
And I was one of the first in the world to say that this is absolutely not a respiratory disease. And at that time, I labeled one component of what the spike protein does, which is an envenomation.
So you're saying that the mechanism of injury is a venom. This is a venom.
It's one of the aspects. There's after I did my venom work, and I looked at other biological processes that this does, that the spike protein triggers, and the two others besides an envenomation is a hibernation, what's called hibernation torpor. Torpor is like hibernation light. It also involves circadian rhythms, but it's more of a day-to-day dip in metabolism. So it's like it's basically like a switch off. Like most people feel a torpor when they get ill with something that puts them into fatigue. That's a form of torpor. You're not completely hibernating, but your body has shut down. So that's one of the triggers, right, that happens with this. And then the third one is an immune tolerance. The closest match to it is actually what happens during pregnancy. Pregnancy has a very specific process, which is just absolutely miraculous and beautiful, in that if you have foreign DNA growing in you, right, which your baby is not only your DNA, right? It's from a male and a female, and so the body would recognize that as a threat. It's not self, right? The body is designed. The immune system is like a threat management system, and it makes an assessment and it says, wait, this is weird. What is this growing in me? Right? What is this thing that's not me? And it will go to attack it. So what pregnancy does is it tags those cells as safe, right? You wouldn't now that without that tag, there would be no life on the planet, because ultimately all living creatures would attack themselves, right, while they're reproducing. So the third circuit is actually very problematic, because what they've done is that they have created a spike protein that has a sequence that tells the body, while it's growing the spike protein, don't attack the spike protein.
So it has a protection mechanism attached to it. Oh, I think I lost you, locked up for just a moment.
Now, if you do, we're back.
Yep, you're back.
If the body does that and it starts tagging foreign protein, and it starts switching off immune attack, then what you'll do is you run the risk of infections. You run the risk of bacteria getting out of control. You run the risk of fungi getting out of control. And you also run the risk of tumors and of cancers, because the body is in a low threat state, right? This is for me the equivalent of, I know that there's been, let's say, an attack somewhere, a church has been attacked somewhere in Africa. And for the next 24 to 48 hours, I expect to see at a train station in New York City, I expect to see us on higher alert. And when I don't see that I get really it concerns me, right? It's not reading the signals, it's not reading the patterns. And in the same way, that's what happens with the body, is that if you've turned off these mechanisms, then you run the risk of the body actually not doing what it does, which is ultimately to clear toxins and to keep balance. So those are the three main circuits that I've looked at, and it matches the symptoms of COVID, long COVID, and vaccine injury. Now, I'll just add this part that I think is really important for people. I no longer believe that there was ever a novel virus.
Okay.
I don't believe. I think that the statistics show us that there wasn't an increase in all-cause mortality in 2020 that was driven by some sort of contagious infectious disease spreading across the world. I think the numbers in 2020 reflect three things actually. primarily the deaths in 2020 were purposeful. They were medically induced deaths, what would be known as death protocols. People were in hospital, that they were labeled as COVID positive, and they were put on a death pathway that is no different than somebody that is terminal. And basically, they're going to make the person comfortable. They're going to give them high levels of drugs to make it easy to sedate them, and ultimately to switch them off. Right. So things like midazolam and propofol, proning somebody. All of this was the all of the ICU doctors, even today, say they were dealing with something so strange that they couldn't do anything but to make these people more comfortable before they died. However, there was already in 2020, very early, a New York City doctor called Carl Sardell. The YouTube video is still up, where he says, and I'll paraphrase, he's like, guys, we have this wrong. He says, this is peculiar. This is matching something that looks more like an altitude sickness. Right? So he's already recognizing that the treatment that they're giving is not aligned for something that's viral at all, which leads me to this huge question that I still have. So what took place in 2020? Were they using a nerve agent? Were they purposefully releasing infectious clones? Is one of the theories. My most plausible case that I'm building, and that I am gathering more and more evidence for every day, is that it looks to me like the most solid evidence that we have is not a lab leak. It's not Rolf Barrick's work at all. It's Moderna's work. This is where I think that I'm gaining some traction, and people are starting to look at the science, and very quietly, like I did with the Venom work, people are nodding, just like you're nodding right now, and they're recognizing, wait, hold on, this sounds a lot more close to what took place. So let me talk you through very quickly what that timeline looks like. In 2017, Moderna started using mRNA for cancer, right, for cancer treatments. Very briefly, what that technology looked like is that they patented a sequence in 2016. They started the clinical trials in 2017. And what they were doing is they were extracting toxins from the person's own cancer cells. And then they were putting that with their patented sequence that allows toxins to replicate. Mm-hmm. And then they were injecting that into people with lipid nanoparticles, right? Very much like the COVID vaccine. They were using up to 34, what I'll call antigens, 34 types of toxic material that's toxic to human beings. They were making up this toxic sludge. They were making sure that it was protected in a lipid nanoparticle. They were injected into these cancer patients. Most of those cancer patients were already in stage 4, and they were dying anyway. Right. So from Moderna's standpoint, a perfect trial, because if your lipid nanoparticles are killing people, well, then you can say your lipid nanoparticles are safe, because it wasn't the lipid nanoparticles, it was the cancer. Mm-hmm. If your toxic injections and a runaway spike protein killed somebody, you could say that's not what happened. These were very sick people anyway. So really what they could do is experiment on dose. They could experiment with their lipid nanoparticles, and they could essentially kill people and get the dose right for themselves and tinker with this, because ultimately what all of the spike protein technology relies on is you can't just have toxic sequences. You've got to have off switches. Yeah. If you're going to put something in a body that's going to create cytokines, mm-hmm. you have to have sequences that switch those cytokines off. And that's what they were tinkering with. So from 2017 through 2019, they're running these clinical trials. But what changed in 2019 is that they paired their stage 2 cancer trials. They paired it with a drug called Keytruda. And that, as a side effect, what that drug is doing is that it can cause huge gut problems in terms of bacterial load and mm-hmm. fungal load and dysbiosis in the gut. If your gut and your system and your immune system is now not clearing those toxins, you will shed those toxins, right? Now, people don't understand shedding, but the easiest way to understand shedding is look at poisonous animals that ingest toxins right? Like a poison dart frog. It eats ants and other insects that have poisons. It digests those poisons, and then it excretes those poisons from its skin. If you make contact with that, by skin contact with that frog, or and like some people do for hallucinogen, using the toxins for hallucinations. If they lick that frog, right, you are licking toxins that then trigger systems in the body. Now, a really strange thing with toxins is that toxins, it it seems like the way that most people understand toxins is that the sequence itself of a toxin is the poison. It's not. What the toxin is just a key that turns a lock, that turns a switch, right? So it's very much like if you think about what they talk, they talk about the nuclear bomb suitcases, right? It's not just a button that you push. You have to put in a key. You have to turn that key, and then the button will function. And so toxic sequences are just that. It's actually not the toxin that's creating the issue that we recognize as a poisoning. It's our own bodies reacting to that turning of the key, and we make the poisons, right?
Okay.
So an animal that bites, let's say a venomous snake, when it is not using it for defense, when it's using it to eat the prey, and it bites the prey and it paralyzes the prey and then it eats the prey whole, what it's doing is it's using the prey's own circuitry to paralyze it, to create a non-panic. It switches off fight and flight. And then what it does is it triggers digestive enzymes that ultimately land up decomposing, because most of these creatures that use venom are in a low metabolic state. They're not going to use up their own energy. These are cold-blooded creatures. They need the help of the animal to digest itself. And so for me, the part that I think makes the most sense in looking at this sequence that's gone across the world is that cancer trial in the pockets where it was being where they were conducting the experiments in North Carolina, Boston, for example. Australia was running those same trials. You have enough places around the world that if people, the immune compromised, these cancer patients, if they were shedding these toxins, people working with them and people going home and they start shedding, they would make other people sick. And you would land up with something that looks like an epidemic into a pandemic from a viral sequence that is not natural. And it's currently still spreading around the world. This is what we know as COVID. And it is a fabricated sequence that was never meant to replicate in the human body. I know I've been haven't given you much time to stop and ask questions, but the part for me that is infuriating about science and around consensus science is that when people just agree with something, right? When there's just compliance, and we have got loads of social experiments to show how easily that can happen.
Yeah.
What it does is it blocks other plausible theories and other plausible, better explanations, and more importantly, other better treatments for the things that we go through. And so the virologists of the world, and then extending into other researchers and other medical professionals, in them not actually understanding where the sequence arrived from, they then block the fact that it becomes easier to understand what's happening and easier to treat. So the original sequence to this was from a copper mine in 2012. They took samples. They took samples from bat droppings, from bat guano, right, bat shit, and everybody talks about the viruses that come from bats, but really where the toxins are always found, just like within our own, they're testing our own wastewater right now. It's always, there's a higher load of toxins in feces. This is why one cultural taboo that's around the world is there isn't a single culture that actually eats feces.
Right.
Just don't do it. Right?
No.
Human beings can recognize
not exciting.
how fragile their systems are, and we know the toxic load in things like E. coli, and we stay away from feces. But when you take when you do these samples, and when they took the samples that killed 3 workers out of 6, right? That's 50%, right? A 50% kill rate. These workers went into the mine. It was an old copper mine. They had a job of cleaning out the bad shit, and they all 6 got sick, and all 6 of them got what we know as COVID. A 100% match. The ground glass infiltrated opacities on the lungs, the clotting, all of that was there. The strange pneumonia came from a fungus that was in that bat shit. And so, what did they do in Wuhan and matches Rolf Barrick's work? They isolated that toxic sequence. It is extremely toxic. It's just 13 letters long. It's part of a 19-letter sequence that Moderna patented. It's part of Rolf Barrick's work as well. And what they recognized is they found one of the most lethal sequences on the planet from fungal copper resistant fungus from that shit. That's all this is.
Are you serious?
That's all this pandemic is. It is a very, very tiny. We called it a hairpin. It's the shape of a loop. If you think about like a lock picking device, right? You don't actually have the actual key. You have something that can get into that lock, and you can fiddle around with it, and then you can turn the lock. And this particular hairpin is the right shape, right? I mean, we can open locks with hairpins, right? So it's similar in that it is the right shape that can go onto receptor sites, not just the ACE2 receptor. There's actually 2 ACE2s. There's a all caps ACE2, and then there's small letter ACE2, which is involved in fungi, and also the nicotinic receptors in the human body. This tiny sequence is so universal because it's found in bacteria, it's found in fungus, it's found in venoms, and it is so universal as a lock-picking tool that nature uses that it will trigger these death spirals. And I'll take a break right there.
Yeah, I want to ask you about this because we're seeing skyrocketing autoimmune conditions right now, as you know. Horrible neurological, especially our autonomic nervous systems are under attack. And we're also seeing severe chronic fatigue. People are suffering so badly 5 years into this thing. And I know you said that the true mechanism of injury is this sequence. Are we continuing to shed this on one another over and over? And is there a way to stop the loop?
So I don't believe that there's going to be a way of permanently stopping this loop. I think that just like I mentioned with a poisonous frog or venomous snakes or other venomous animals, where you're talking about a spider or a scorpion, the human body is now producing venom. Right? It's producing venom. Just like those creatures, the impact, what's really interesting is that most people's genetics will treat this venom, right? This enzyme, this colony of bacteria, fungi, enzymes, they will produce this venom, but it won't necessarily make any noticeable change to that human being unless they're at genetic risk to that internal venom, right? So we've essentially, what they've done is they've made human beings another venomous mammal. And we will continue producing that sequence. Now, who will produce more of that sequence? It's generally those people that have autoimmune issues, because the body is getting rid of the toxin externally. It's excreting the toxin. It's not necessarily has the capacity to use B cells and T cells and to deactivate it internally. It's got to shed it. Right, it's got to excrete it from the body, which is why, you know, when they talk about variants of this, they always point to the immunocompromised people making new variants, because it's escaping, and it's not going to escape exactly the same. It's going to be fragments of toxins, and depending on what the human body is able to produce, those toxins are going to have similarity, but you're going to have differences amongst them, and that's what they're going to call mutations. That's what they're going to call variants. And I think that the variant that they said that was out of South Africa, which was Omicron, was
Yeah.
either them tweaking the sequence and getting it to be highly infectious but less severe, which they have the capacity to do, or it was the nature's way of basically venom's not going to work if it kills the host.
Right.
So nature is going to have a way of eventually people are going to get used to it, right? It's like smell, right? If somebody works in a sewage, if they work in a dump, in a waste management place, you and I would walk in there and we'd gag immediately.
Yeah.
But people go to work there every day. They don't gag. They don't smell that smell anymore. And it's the body essentially changing to be able to deal with certain internal and external circumstances. So the shedding, when we talk about, when you ask the question of whether we can get rid of it, I think that it is not only do we have a problem that human beings are producing it, and we know that people are continuously producing spike protein, but we also know that they're continuously seeding this because they're still doing COVID vaccines. And guess what? They've got other mRNA. Anybody from 2025 onwards that was offered a RSV vaccine, you might not have been told if somebody went out and got an RSV vaccine that was mRNA. Moderna has an mRNA RSV vaccine, and all of their technology, right? All of the mRNA products and all COVID vaccines rely on this batshit sequence.
Yeah.
It has to be in there. It all relies on this hairpin trigger, and then they can add whatever other sequences they want to switch on the immune system to give to make more of an immune reaction. But their key piece of technology, right, that they all fight over and there's lawsuits over, and even Monsanto jumped on it, is literally around this tiny 13-letter sequence that is a universal trigger for toxins.
So is this 13-letter sequence sitting in our biofilm in our gut, telling our body to make clots? Like, what is it actually doing to our bodies?
So in most people, it's currently dormant.
Okay.
Okay, that's why you don't see, we've got an all-cause mortality around the world, right?
Yeah.
But it's not, it's noticeable for those people that are looking for it, but it's not noticeable in terms of, tons of ambulances every day like it was, right? In 2021, when they released that vaccine, it was endless, and you were hearing people that were sick, and you were having people in hospital. So it's gone dormant, and essentially they've injected enough people around the world that it's seeded, that I would say that every human being has been exposed to it, and more than likely it is in somebody's bioform somewhere, and it's not creating any problem at this stage. Okay. The sequence is out there. Where it is problematic for people is that if somebody has a high fungal load or a high bacterial load, right, they are going to produce more of this toxin. And they're currently what we know as the people that are sick, right? This is the vaccine injured, and this is people that would say that they have long COVID.
I see.
They're producing this toxin. The sequence is also very interesting because there's two main concerns that are very sci-fi with this sequence.
Okay.
If you have a sequence that's inserted itself into not necessarily even the human genome, but into the genome that we call ourselves, which is where a lot of our physical makeup is actually bacteria and fungi, right? We don't like to think of ourselves as this island of walking bacteria and fungi, but we're a colony, and that's life. So if this sequence is there, there's two main concerns with it. One of which is that it can be used as a kill switch, which we can get into, and the other one is very sneaky in terms of if you have a sequence that's being inserted into people, and this is where it changes from 13 to 19 letters, you can essentially use genetic therapy because you need an anchor point. You need to have inserted something where you can then use gene splicing. You can put enzymes in, just like they do with any purification of toxins. They will be able to tinker with DNA by having a recognizable sequence in human beings. Their sequence that they inserted, when I talk about this 13 nucleotide sequence, it is actually a DNA gene repair sequence, right? So that's why it's in life forms. That's why it's in bacteria. That's why it's in fungi. And the way that you would switch it on and off is you would stress that living creature, and then what we just call epigenetics, right? The genetics live within all of us, and then it switches on and off. It's just a switch. So you can essentially trigger it to repair DNA faster, right? Which is where I differ from a lot of people in terms of people looking at the statistics and going, "Oh, the vaccinated did better than the unvaccinated, and it reduced all-cause mortality, and it's lowered some cancers." Well, it should. It should. If you have a switch that you can trigger that increases DNA repair, right? You're essentially stimulating a part of the body, telling the body to repair itself.
Right.
Right. It's a healing gene, right? A DNA repair gene. But if you trigger it the other way, if it reads backwards, right? Because just like a typewriter, this is you've got a set of amino acids that read one way tells living creatures to either repair the DNA. If you read it the other way, it's telling the DNA to decompose. Right. And so the kill switch is highly problematic, because ultimately that kill switch can be triggered in its reverse way by geoengineering, by sun dimming, right, and EMF,
Yes.
and you will tell the fungi and bacteria that they're under threat, that have
Right.
incorporated the sequence, and they will become resistant, and they will push back, and they will thrive. And ultimately, what ends up killing people is not viral. It's bacterial infections and it's fungal infections. This is why you saw an uptick in sepsis. This is
Right.
why you saw an uptick in everything from UTIs to conjunctivitis. I mean, and of course, all the fungal infections. This is why people are very sensitive. Those that are very sensitive to mold. This was hugely problematic.
Huge.
Right? Because
Yeah.
because it's ultimately a fungal infection.
So what I'm hearing you say is we all have bacterial and fungi in our bodies, and it's exacerbated by probably frequency with 5G and geoengineering, and we are actually just, our bodies are being manipulated by the terrain that we're in. And so, I know people feel despondent and overwhelmed about all this. Is there any hope going forward? Are you hopeful about anything? And is there anything we could do to try to mitigate any of this weaponry against us?
Great question. So going back to what I said in terms of how I got into this work, the hope lies in prevention.
Okay.
Right. And just like I did with any other mass killing, you have to understand, one, who the perpetrators are. Right. So we have to name these people. So people like Bill Gates, people like Peter Thiel, right? The big names that people have isolated in this. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein, right? Yeah. The files was exactly what people that would have been called conspiracy theorists needed, because a conspiracy is organized crime.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yes, there's all the other stuff around pedophilia, human trafficking. But ultimately, what those files did for those people that have been aware of this long-term plan, it's connected the dots into the money making and into the ultimate depopulation strategy. So how do we prevent anything, right? You basically call out the predators, right? And just like what's starting to happen with some of them, you make sure that they get canceled. You make sure that they get prosecuted. You make sure that every aspect of our law is applied to human beings, war crimes, right? Treason, all of these all of these actionable steps we have is no different than me helping a school know that they've got somebody that says on, next week I'm going out and I'm coming to that school and I'm killing people. You got to know the perpetrator. You got to know how far they're along in their plan, and then you've got to be able to put that plan. You've got to be able to stop that plan from being actionable, right? So where are we in this current plan? We have this dormant sequence. We have this. We have more mRNA on the way. We have self-amplifying RNA on the way that's going to be even more problematic than the mRNA. So we have to focus on getting that information out for people so that we can let humanity know and let the scientists know that are sleeping through this that they should be doing something about this, right? So that's one aspect. The other aspect is we know that 6G, right, is on the way. President Trump just released a huge, basically putting a whole bunch of agencies tasked to speed up this process of bringing us 6G. We absolutely need to demand that this is not safe, that this is not a good idea to microwave human beings, and that when you microwave creatures, it's no different than any other form of radiation. You will stress them out and they will take over, right? It's a uranium mine. It's what happened in Chernobyl. It's what if you go to the any of the primordial soup that's in places like Glacier National Park and Yellowstone. If you go and if you look at what thrives in those environments, it's the most toxic bacteria and fungi known to human beings because it gets pushed to be able to thrive in that environment. So 6G is hugely problematic. Then let's talk about what the average person, what we can all do, right? Besides stopping this politically, to stop, start calling an action, to science, to start, scientists to start being ethical again. We need to understand that ultimately what the just like what the body is doing to fight back, we need to feed that system with the resources that are needed. So, for example, in hibernation, if somebody is being forced into a hibernation torpor state, until the body says, no, hold on, I'm not hibernating, all right? And there's a couple of ways you can do that. Making sure that you're getting sunlight lets the body know, hey, it's actually, no, this is weird. There's sun outside. Like, I shouldn't be sleeping, right? Getting outdoors and making sure that we're following those circadian rhythms lets the body know. Grounding, frequency work. I mean, it's so interesting that we have these very primitive mechanisms like the sound or shem, right, that vibrate the vagal nerve, right? Another aspect to it is even in the ritual of Sukkot, which follows the Exodus. They take the palm branch and they shake it. Right. This is all vagal stimulation, right? No machinery involved. You're shaking up this whole region over here. This is the superhighway going from the brain to the gut. You're shaking it to let it know it's alive, it's moving, right? You're not running a marathon with it. You're not going for a sprint. That's very dangerous to do in hibernation torpor. So things like Qigong and Tai Chi and yoga are all awakening the body in a natural way. The rewilding protocol that I built includes all of this, and it also includes the foods and the supplements, if people are not getting it from the food, that are necessary to basically protect the body from iron overload. Because the core of what we're talking about is, whether it's COVID, whether it's long COVID or vaccine injury, the damage is being done by iron that's not in a safe state.
Okay.
Right? So iron needs to stay in the body with 3 charges. Fe3 plus is what the body needs, and it needs to be able to go from Fe3 plus to Fe2 plus. Okay, but the more Fe2 plus we have as free floating iron, we're essentially rusting the system, because there's water, there's free floating iron, and we are not only we think about ourselves as bone and flesh and proteins, but we're metallic. We've got our nervous system is a circuitry. I mean, we're running an electrical system, right? The heart, for example, is electrical.
Yes.
Right. So if you have this iron toxicity, what we have to be able to do is we have to give the body everything it needs to basically chelate this iron to get rid of the toxic iron, and be constantly cycling through the minerals that we need, and we need to be able to protect the body. So it needs things like high levels of glutathione, right? Nicotinamide, niacin, all of these very, very primitive structures that give our body a chance, right? Copper is the big one that I've worked on from the beginning. And why copper? So a couple of things. I originally got into copper work because when I understood that an aspect of the spike protein was a match to venom, right? At the time, I was calling it a venom homolog. It's even smaller than that. You can call it a venom analog, which is even, we can take it even smaller. It's the shape, right, that we're concerned about. And so when I started looking at the spike protein in terms of its various shapes, of where it can insert. So, for example, I got some Legos over here, right? So for me, like, it's if you're building a spike protein, and you're connecting it, the pieces to eventually where you've got, let's say, a shape, right? Put a big one on there. Right. Let's say this particular shape comes along, and here's a docking port, a receptor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it comes along, it's floating around. Okay, there's not a match, but it can lock in over here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It fits in. Okay. So what I discovered in terms of neutralizing, let's say here's our receptor, here's our toxic protein coming along, right? So if I don't want these to touch, right, then one of the things I can do is, this is how, for example, copper would work. It would bind on here, right? And now there's
So it blocks the receptor.
to float it, right? And then what's going to happen is that's not going to stay bound. That's not going to stay bound to that. The copper is going to detach,
right?
And it's going to move through the body, right? Which is why as we do this, let's say here's our piece of copper. It binds, okay, and now it's out again. This is why you need copper and zinc in the body, right? That's one of the primary reasons. It's making something called SOD1. Now, if you don't have enough and you've got this binding taking place and you've got this high level of oxidative stress, it will eventually lead to things like ALS, into prion, into amyloids. We talked about, everybody knows about the clots, the microclots. That is mostly coming from copper deficiency.
Wow.
Why? Because copper is being cycled through the body and it's being used, and it's plugging all of these holes as best as possible. And also copper is very involved in detoxing the body from iron. So copper is being pulled. It's being pulled from all kinds of places. You will notice people's hair got brittle. They started losing their hair. That's because copper was being pulled. It wasn't being used for regrowth of hair. Copper will come out the circuitry. Copper will flood into the bloodstream. It will leave the tissues, and it will start protecting the spots that it needs to go on. And if you think about this, we see this all the time. If you see copper and it's turning green from oxidative stress, it creates a thin film called a patina. That's what the body's doing. It's creating a patina, right? So that's one of the ways, right? So that's where copper comes in.
I see.
Okay. Well, now so for me, that I had a product, and I'm very careful about the claims, right? But from a purely mechanical point of view and pulling from scientific papers, one of the things is if this was our spike protein, and we were essentially trying to neutralize this, because this is how I got into understanding copper's role. If we wanted to put this block here and block that hole, right?
Right.
This is why I brought out this. Right. So you've got tiny, tiny particles of copper, and now copperine is a mixture between copper. It's got trace silver. It's got zinc to balance out that copper. I've included myrrh because myrrh is the right shape to actually help with inflammation. And so you have this ability, right, to use a block, right? And specifically, if this was getting into your nose, right, and hitting those olfactory bulbs, right? If this was your olfactory bulb receptor and this was arriving, then what I want to do is I want to come over here
And
and
block
I
it.
want to load up the olfactory bulb. And I'm not saying this is what's happening. This is just the science, right? The FDA and the FTC is very specific about claims. So for educational purposes and for my own thinking through and for my own design, that's the mechanism that I looked at, because what you're doing is you're spraying and you're getting to the olfactory bulbs and you're coating it and you're stopping this from binding. Right.
Yeah.
The other way, and not necessarily in the nasal passage, but let's say for other receptors where the spike protein is binding, for example, if this was floating around and this is going to bind to a nicotinic receptor on the vagal nerve inside the body, right, or in the gut, this is where nicotine comes in, right?
Yep.
And because now you've got this thing, and nicotine is blocking it, and then nicotine has a fast half-life, and so it's binding, it's unbinding, right? And that's why a nicotine patch, for example, or nicotine lozenges help
Yep.
to reduce symptoms and can be used in a preventive way too. So that's part of my thinking around copper and why I brought out copperine. I think what's interesting for me is that beyond those mechanisms that I just pointed out in terms of my thinking through it, the claim that I can make and that all nasal sprays, right, can make, whether it's clear, is another really good nasal spray. It's also just like copperine would be. It has antimicrobial properties in terms of its ingredients. A big aspect to human health is making sure that there's nasal hygiene.
Yeah.
Right. There's a reason that mucus comes out of our nose. There's a reason that it floods. There's a reason that we are more susceptible when the nasal passages get dry, like in a winter time period. It's leaving those receptors, right? It's leaving this receptor. Let's say this is your nasal hygiene, a smooth surface, right? Keeping the nasal passages hydrated. Like, there's your smooth surface.
Right.
So the minute the nasal passages get dry, right, and brittle, that's when you have more binding.
I see.
So that's the claim that I could make beyond all of the other mechanisms. The fact that this is hydration, right, and this is a hydrator, that makes it an efficient nasal spray, because it hydrates and keeps the passages. You can feel it, right? Even from that 3 seconds right now of me doing this, I can feel the nasal passages. I can feel they wet.
Yes.
Right? And so that is whether it's copperine or any of the other nasal sprays, they highly recommend it during this time period. They won't necessarily, just like I'm not making claims that it's designed to block shedding, but ultimately the mechanics of it make sense in terms of all the science that we have around it, and watching the human body do its thing, right? The other aspect is in terms of the rewilding protocol, is that food becomes really important, and specifically the major issue that poisons a human being from these three circuits, and especially the envenomation one, is the inability to digest glucose.
Okay.
All sugars, right? So I talk about, you can think about it biblically. The last thing that you would want to do if you were bitten by a snake is eat an apple, right? So just in terms of even just a child like story of letting somebody know, like, stay away from fruits if there's a snake bite, right?
Right.
During that cycle of anaphylaxis, of complement immune system, the body is shifting, and it's no longer able to use glucose for food, and for good reason, because the creature that's trying to envenomate somebody or something doesn't want that creature to make energy.
Right.
Right. And so it switches off the ability to make energy from glucose. So the protocol includes a pretty strict carnivore diet, at least at the beginning, so that you can start building back your strength. You can start ridding the body of some of this excess iron. You can start redirecting the resources needed to build back the gut bacteria, the positive gut bacteria. You want to eliminate the negative gut bacteria and start bringing back essentially the gut biome. Whether it's the gut biome has been really interesting, because I think that most people, when they talk about, sort of restoring bacteria in the body, it's mostly centered around the biggest pocket of it, which is our gut. But it's not just gut bacteria, it's bacteria and fungi throughout the body. It's essentially getting to the bioform, and making sure that the bioform is brought back into check, right?
Yes.
Part of that bioform is really interesting, because it also forms, and this is where you have a high risk of clot formation, as that DNA, switch, that kill switch is toggled. What you're going to have is so much free floating DNA from cells that are dying. It's called netosis. That it's literally like a net, like a spider's web, where the DNA itself starts clumping and starts creating these threads. And that's the start of a bioform, right? You need something to grow on. And so the DNA that's not clearing fast enough becomes the start of the amyloidic process, and it becomes the start ultimately of prion, which is the scariest aspect of this, because we can think about that kill switch as a transmissible prion.
That's terrifying.
From a spiritual perspective, it's absolutely terrifying, right? Because it's essentially the zombification of a body. The spiritual component to this, when you talk about solutions or what we can do, the spiritual component is absolutely vital. It's vital that people realize that this is good versus evil.
Yes.
It's vital that we realize that we are collateral damage to warlords. And
Yes.
these warlords are the big battle that we're fighting right now in the physical world is old money versus new money.
Yeah.
Right. And the old money was actually very interesting, because it was predictable, and they followed rules of engagement. And there was almost a very perverse politeness to old money and royalty in terms of what they would do and how they would start wars. There was a fake politeness that is less dangerous than your impulsive. The hardest violence to predict and to do something about is not just intentional violence. It's intentionality combined with impulsivity.
Right.
Which is what you got in the Peter Thiels of the world, where ultimately we are the collateral damage of them trying to replace those old world structures with new world order. Right. That's the big battle. The
unlimited money. So
is what?
And with unlimited money to do
Correct.
so.
Correct. And I think that the interesting aspect to me in terms of watching myself through this and watching others, and I'm going to choose my words carefully, especially that we're coming to an end over here. Money is a very interesting aspect to this, because if people say that the root of all evil is money, then what that also does is it starves anybody that's trying to do well.
Right.
Not trying to help. Right. There's a belief system that needs to be challenged in our communities, in the communities that are fighting back. I often think about David and Goliath, and I think about how that story, for thousands of years, is an inspiring story of somebody with limited resources that is not the match to the giant, right, to the Goliath, who's able to take that giant out. But what fascinates me, and I'm pretty critical about this in terms of where we are in humanity, is there's a feeling that David needs to do this on his own.
Yeah.
There's a feeling that he needs to come with his own slingshot. that he needs to feed himself, that he needs, the clothes that he wears to go and do that battle. There's
Yeah.
a, there's a very distorted sense of what this takes and how we're going to fight this. And I think the distortion is people think that this can be done without money, right?
Yeah.
So when I got into this fight 6 years ago, nobody asked me to do it. And
Yes.
so I'm completely faith-based in my dedication to this.
Yeah.
And where I find it troubling is I find myself often sounding like a beggar. I find myself reaching out all the time to say subscribe or
Right.
support or buy this product and I'm going to ship it out to you as soon as possible,
Right.
because I'm not a hedge fund guy.
Sure.
I'm not sitting with investors throwing money at this, and that's what should be happening.
Right.
You can see, for example, that the bigger entities that have been able to get involved in this fight, they have really good funding, but they also position themselves out of reach for a lot of people,
Yeah.
whether it's through a membership or very expensive supplements. I'm trying to do this slightly differently. Well, not slightly. I mean, I think I'm doing it entirely differently. I put out the rewilding protocol that tells people to go and get sunlight and tells them the right frequency and tells them the right exercises to do and the right food. And even up to this point, I haven't put affiliate links to it. It needs to happen, but that's not the driver, because I don't want to be out of reach to people. I don't want people to think, oh, Dr. Braun said this is the exact copper to buy, and I'm not buying this other one over here that's less expensive. That's not empowering people, right? That's not teaching people to fish, right? And
well, you did create this, and this formula is phenomenal. It's like nothing else out there. Could you tell us, for those who do want your supplement, how can they get that, Dr. Braun?
Well, currently they can just go to copperine.com. And just know, just like I did once before, when we're running smaller lots, is that just be patient. Just be patient in terms of put your order in. If I'm able to get it out next week, great. If it's going to take a month from now, depending on how many orders come in, but I've given people a commitment. I'm a person of my word, and they've been given a commitment that they'll have it within 60 days. I'm thinking that it's going to be much quicker than that. They can. I can create a code. Let's do Ash 29, so that people know that they can get a 20% discount from you. And I didn't even think about doing that up front. I always very cautious with any of this stuff, because people have this. One of my least favorite words is grift and grifting. Right. It really destroys those like myself and many others that are absolutely dedicated to this with a sense of integrity. And I make sure that I push back on those kind of words. But I also want people to realize that Copperine has become a community effort.
Yeah.
Right. I might have funded the original, development of it. I may have funded the original, getting it out there at first. But it was literally driven by, and still is going to be driven by people ordering this product and building it for ourselves. It's for the people. It's by the people.
I love that. And you nebulize it, correct?
Yeah. I mean, I don't call it a nebulizer. It's ultimately a mist. A nasal mist. We don't supply these anymore. There's a link for people to be able to get them either from, something like Amazon, or they can go out and, it's a cosmetic product. It's it makes a nano mist. A fascinating part about this is that I'm allergic to bees. And whenever I've either been stung by a bee or a mosquito, whatever it is, that's a venomous bite, I literally apply it, and if it's severe like a bee sting, I'll even take the liquid, and I'll put the liquid on it in terms of copper being able to neutralize And that's just me, right? I'm not making that claim. I'm not putting that on the website, but I'm telling you that the various ways that I found this to be useful, I've used it in those ways. Something that I think that your audience and that you might appreciate is um, can end with how far back this technology goes, in that the closest match to what I found to this fungal epidemic and humanity searching for a way out, it replicates the plagues of Egypt, and it replicates the solution. And Moses actually brought out a copper rod,
Wow.
and that's what our medical symbol, what everybody knows as the caduceus, is actually a piece of copper, right, with a snake wrapped around it to show that copper can neutralize a snake. So what the pharmaceutical companies and the medical community do, they focus on the snake.
Yeah.
They focus on the poison. They focus on the toxin, whereas the solution is what needs to be focused on.
Yes.
Right. And so even at that point, for thousands of years since Moses did that, there has been a smear campaign. There are people that will watch this video. And there's even people with large followings that will put out information that copper is toxic. The Egyptians had a saying, a slogan, that copper meant life. That's one of their hieroglyphics. Copper is life. Sure, anything can be toxic in high doses, and anything can be toxic used in the wrong way. The interesting part of the smear campaign is that it has not only lasted thousands of years, but it's been accelerated. People are pulling out copper pipes from their houses and replacing it with plastic. People are no longer drinking from copper vessels.
No.
People are absolutely copper deficient. I will challenge anybody with any symptoms right now of any disease, go and look up copper deficiency and your disease will be there. 100%. 100%. Every
So
single
chronic
disease,
disorders, inflammation,
all of it,
neurological,
all of it.
all that, copper.
Copper
Amazing.
plays such a crucial role. The best text that people can read is from Dr. Morley. If they haven't discovered Dr. Morley's work, because copper is the people that will talk about copper toxicity, they are just clueless when it comes to how it's all about copper balance. It's all about having the right amount of zinc. It's all about the fact that it is so related to iron. It's all about the fact that if you go and get a blood test and it's showing that you're high in copper, you're more than likely deficient, which is really weird. Why would it be high in your blood and you're going to be deficient? Because it's not supposed to be there.
Right.
It's supposed to be in the tissue. When it pulls out of the tissues, which happens when we getting older, it will accumulate. When they find it in places and they'll say copper is related to Alzheimer's because it's being pulled out of the tissue. There is some other issue taking place. The copper is doing the work. The copper is the workhorse over here, and it's competing. When we talked about that, that iron needs to be in a 3+ state.
Yeah.
Well, the reason that copper is doing the heavy lifting over here is copper moves between Cu1+ and Cu2+. The minute it's in Cu2+, it competes with iron in its 2+ state, right? It's all about shape. It's all about size. So where that iron is causing rust, where that iron is binding to receptors, you'd rather have copper binding to those receptors than the iron. Right, the copper is not going to rust in the same way. It's going to get that patina that we talked about. Yeah. And so I want to become the person that's the most known in my time period, right, in this life, and to be able to leave a legacy of reminding people that we are filled with solutions. It's not just about copper. It's about a lifestyle. It's about the rewilding. It's about talking to people like you. It's about people like you working really hard to bring out this information. It is about getting back in community. I want people to realize that one of the things that happened that we need to really pay attention to, so that never happens again, is that religious organizations were weaponized. They infiltrated the world's religions. All religions were given money and power and influence to go out and push this kill switch. And we need a reckoning on that. I mean, whether it's apologies from the pastors, whether it's the monks that were involved and getting this out to their Buddhist communities, there needs to be an awareness that they were just as tricked and influenced, because guess what? The snake will rear its head again, and it will do it to the people again. And so whoever's listening to this, that's a person of faith, that is in a leadership position, hold yourself accountable, right? To error is human. To forgive is divine. And forgiveness cannot come when somebody doesn't know that they need forgiveness, right? It has to be asked for. It has to be received. It's a gift. And people that have been involved in this, then people, even now, that will, hear this information from me and say, well, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a conspiracy theorist, whatever it is. The damage that is being done by regular folks has been tremendous.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is, everyone, take care of yourself. Look up Dr. Braun. He's on X, right? You can find you on X. Is that where you are, your main profile?
I'm the most free with my words and information on X. I'm slowly moving to longer form articles, both on X and mostly on Substack. I don't use Facebook that much anymore, simply because I am not somebody that forgets what was done, right? And Facebook absolutely, was really instrumental at blocking life-saving information for people, including right, what would have been effective treatments for people from 2020 onwards, and then information about, how bad the vaccines were. So I hardly use those, but I do use X and I use Substack. I also have on Spotify, which I'm going to start using more often. Just doing more of this kind of stuff. I will load this podcast there as well onto Spotify. And mostly, I want people to know that my big goal, the big dream and the big prayer that we can all do together, is I want to be out there in community. So I'm visualizing and manifesting and praying for a road trip, of being on the road, getting an RV, getting out in community, getting out into church, getting to synagogues, mosques, temples, town halls, and just reminding people, that we are human. And human beings absolutely thrive and need human connection, and we need to do that in a more physical form. That's the counterpoint to AI and not knowing if a video is fake or not, or not knowing whether this whole episode has been AI. If people are able to come to us in person and hear us on a chair somewhere, you interviewing me in person in a room somewhere, it's going to be felt and connected with very differently.
Yep. Humanity and the human connection is where our future needs to go, and not more disconnection. I completely agree. And I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk to us today. Again, everyone can go to copperine.com and support Dr. Braun and his invention and his work and his love of humanity. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us today.
Well, you're so welcome, and thank you for doing this. Really appreciate you.
All right. God bless. Talk to you soon. Thank you, Dr. Braun.
Godspeed.
Bye-bye.